as follows. The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Let me begin when ready.
Give me liberty or give me death. This quote from Patrick Henry demonstrates the revolutionary belief that natural rights are worth fighting for. In order to protect these rights, America needed to create a constitution that would prevent the government from becoming tyrannical.
Primarily, the First Amendment to the Constitution secures political and religious freedoms. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Additionally, the founders emphasized separation of powers, which can be seen in Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution.
Furthermore, a system of checks and balances was established to prevent a tyrannical government from taking over. For example, both houses of Congress must vote to enact all laws, the President can veto legislation, and the Supreme Court can rule laws unconstitutional as they see fit.
To further protect revolutionary principles, voting rights were protected in the 15th, 17th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, and 26th Amendments to ensure popular sovereignty.
Likewise, Article 4, as well as the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, establishes a system of federalism to preserve the states' rights, while still granting the federal government supreme authority.
According to Reagan, as government expands, liberty contracts. Vice versa, if government is limited, liberty and the voice of the people expands.
Moreover, Article 21 of the United Nations 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. Across history, beliefs, and nations, it is agreed upon that the power of the government comes from the people.
To illustrate, Locke wrote, "No one can be put out of this estate and subjected to the political power of another without his own consent."
Consequently, the founders agreed in the Declaration of Independence that governments are only instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Additionally, consent is equally important when amending the Constitution. Although the people are not directly involved in amending the United States Constitution, the people are involved in some state amendment processes.
For example, the Wyoming Constitution Section 1 states, "For the advancement of these ends, they have at all times an inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper." This statement also indicates the people have the power to refuse documents proposed by governments.
For instance, in 2016, an amendment to allow the legislature to authorize the investment of public employee retirement system funds and permanent state funds in equities, such as stock or shares in private or public companies, was proposed and passed by 2/3 of the legislature, but was defeated by referendum in the preceding popular election.
Thus, the Wyoming Constitution requires the voters to further approve amendments after the legislature passes them to ensure consent of the governed is adequately upheld.
Equally important, revolutionary principles are still seen in modern times. For instance, the idea of popular sovereignty was seen in the 2020 presidential election.
To illustrate, mail-in votes took place to allow the largest majority of eligible citizens to vote. Portal.ct.gov wrote, more than 650,000 voters cast their vote by absentee ballot.
Additionally, the use of peaceful protests found in the First Amendment has also taken place in society today.
For instance, Fox 8, Time, and CNN have all recorded that about 93% of Black Lives Matter protests have been peaceful.
Furthermore, recently the concept of checks and balances is apparent with Bill H.R. 6395. This bill was proposed in the House of Representatives and was vetoed by President Trump. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate overrode the presidential veto and the bill was passed.
Although, once the bill was passed, the rule of law was upheld as stated in Article 6. This Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land.
Ultimately, as Thomas Jefferson stated, man is not made for the state, but the state for man, and it derives its just powers only from the consent of the governed. We are now ready to take your questions.
I'll jump in then. We heard a lot about the importance of the consent of the people and the will of the people, but what happens if the people are misled or misinformed? How does that complicate our ideas here?
Well, one of the fundamental revolutionary principles inscribed in the Constitution is a notion of federalism and various checks and balances and separation of powers, such that a wayward populace that might influence a government in a corrupt fashion might be checked, that the effects of their desires might be checked by various other branches of government or by their state governments.
You referenced the Bill of Rights in your essay. Can you elaborate further on examples within the Bill of Rights that further the revolutionary principles?
I believe the idea of petitioning the government and that the government should protect that right is a revolutionary principle that is protected by Amendment 1. I think also the revolutionary principles that Locke stated of natural rights with life, liberty, and property can also be seen with the Fourth Amendment and unreasonable search and seizure, that the people have the right to privacy and their own property.
We also have the Third Amendment addressing the quartering of troops, which was an issue during the time of breaking away from Great Britain, and so this is protected under the Third Amendment.
In addition to this, as my colleague previously mentioned, the Ninth and 10th Amendments that grant federalism through the use of enumerated rights are also an example of this.
Thank you.
Wow, you said so many interesting things. I have to figure out what to go with. Well, let me start with this. You referenced the notion that Wyoming has this referendum system to check the state legislature. What are the arguments for and against having a national referendum?
I believe that an argument for the national government referendum would be more direct involvement in the government from the people. I think this could also be seen as a con of having a referendum. I think that there are cases in the United States government today that would benefit from having less involvement of the populace.
And to cite some evidence here, James Madison in Federalist 10 cites the problem of factions as potentially arising without a large republic. So mandating a nationwide referendum would be in some sense antithetical to republicanism.
I have a question, and it'll be interesting to ask Wyoming this. The Electoral College, do we think that is helping the will of the people be expressed, and or is it a hindrance? Is it both? What do you guys think on that?
I think the Electoral College is a great way to give perception of the will of the people, as we have both the big states and the smaller states being represented within the Electoral College. I think a better way to also perceive the consent of the governed would to be take up the congressional districting method, which is taken up by Maine, where they actually split the votes within their state according to what percentages vote for certain political parties.
I think the Electoral College also is beneficial because of the pros and cons of both the New Hampshire plan and the Virginia plan, or New Jersey plan, I'm sorry, and the Virginia plan originally proposed at the Constitutional Convention that was then later settled with the Great Compromise, which is very similar to how the Electoral College is run today.
You referenced, I think it was a quote from President Reagan, something along the lines of limited government helps expand voice and popular sovereignty, and a stronger or growing government helps to combat that. Do you have an example or two in either instance where you think that's, I guess I'm asking, do you agree with that statement? If so, do you have an example or two, or why do you?
I think that one example of this, where liberty was actually limited by the expansion of government, could be seen through the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Go ahead.
I think we can also see where liberty is expanded for the people through the 17th Amendment, where we have direct election of senators, and this gives way to more consent from the governed.
Okay. Is consent easier or more difficult today in this country?
I think consent is easier. As we referenced in our essay, the absentee ballots that were used in the most recent election increased the popular sovereignty and the amount of votes that were cast in the election. I think having more people voting gauges the consent of the governed more accurately than in previous elections.
I would like to
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'd like to disagree with my colleague and say that consent is harder to gauge nowadays, especially since 18 to 26-year-olds, young adults, have the lowest voter turnout in history.
Thank you.
So let me follow up on that and ask your thoughts and analysis of the current trend we see in a number of states that are restricting voting in the name of voter security and election integrity, whatnot. But they seem to be limiting voting, making it harder for people to vote. What do you think about that? And what are some possible remedies?
Well, there are common sense limitations, as in the Georgia bill that was being debated over recently. We need to be able to accurately gauge consent. It can't just be a slew of various of a plebiscite or something like that. It has to be. We have to know who's voting. We have to ensure that these people are legal voters, legal participants within the system, so as to preserve the system's integrity. Although it is possible on the flip side of that a particular law could be too restrictive of voting rights.
And if that does happen, right, if there's a legitimate claim that perhaps some of these well-intended laws are actually really intended to suppress the vote, what's the remedy? What's a possible solution?
Could you rephrase the question, please?
So if you're living in Georgia, for example, and your group is clearly being violated, right, or suppressed, and you can make a claim for that and legitimately, what do you do?
I think if you have a legitimate case against, or for your case that you're being discriminated against, or your group is not being accurately represented, I think you can file a court case and sue either the state or the elections commission and try and fight and defend your rights in court for your voting rights.
So what's the constitutional situation then? What's the Constitution say?
The Constitution agrees, I think, with the First Amendment, with the freedom of petition, or the right to petition. I think they would agree that you can both petition but also bring it to court later on.
And I think the trend throughout history has been with the...
Finish your thought, please.
Well, with the various voting amendments that we see, 13th, 14th, and 15th, with the slave amendments, 17th, 19th, and recently the 23rd, and abolition of poll taxes with the 24th, all present a general trend historically towards an increase in representation among voters.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Awesome.
Thank you.
Would
Good.
my fellow judges wish to start the process?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Nicely done, folks. You demonstrated a excellent breadth of understanding. You complement one another well as countered on occasion with evidence, maybe disagreeing with your colleague, which I view as a strength, the fact that you're able to think critically and offer other side of a particular argument. You're obviously clearly well informed, and your different citations, I mean, I wrote down a number from factions to your references to certain state constitutions and what's going on currently. So kind of from beginning to end, you seem to have an excellent grasp of those issues. So I always like to add both commendations and congratulations for making it to this point. It's impressive. We all know how much work goes into it. So congratulations to you as well as your teachers and those that help you. So nicely done. We wish you well as this progresses along with after this. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll jump in next. One of the things that I thought you guys did excellent with is understanding the nuance of these questions. And you know, we all don't have to be in agreement. There was some disagreement among yourselves, and then even like I heard a couple of times on the flip side, or while this is true, this is also a consideration. So I think that's an important understanding to these. I think probably especially in Unit 1 because it's so philosophical. I think you guys did a real good job understanding that. if I had to like find something to suggest an improvement on, bring that in a little bit earlier. I think your prepared remarks were excellent and they were well cited, etc. But bring in a little bit more of that nuance into that earlier, because you clearly have such a good grasp on it, which has been very impressive. It was also politically balanced, like on left, right. We got Reagan, and we got 96% of the protesters are peaceful, and there's a few other things that were thrown in there too. So that's fair-minded and it's reasonable. I want to keep saying more and more. I'll just say at the end, I like that you guys know your state constitution. You brought that right in the very beginning. I am 32 years old. I have 2 degrees in history, and I am only now just sort of understanding how my state works. So well done. I mean that sincerely. That's impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will certainly echo the sentiments of my colleagues. Agree wholeheartedly. I really was impressed with your overall team effort. You all contributed unique ideas. You balanced off each other exceptionally. That's what America needs to do. We need to just learn how to agree to disagree, right? And talk to each other. So I appreciate that. I really liked coming out of the gate with Patrick Henry, right? You know, someone we don't hear about very often, but he's important because he's talking about natural rights, and that was the revolutionary notion. Like, how dare these people think they can rule themselves? Right, says the king and the Brits, right? But indeed we did, and we're still struggling, right? How do we do this? Well, we haven't figured it out yet. We are really struggling, and you're struggling with it in your minds, and that's exactly what we want you to do. Keep thinking. I loved your very concrete example, HR 6395, right? Perfect checks and balances. The will of the people is expressed through our legislative bodies. However, coming from California and the Electoral College, I'd have to disagree. We'll save that conversation for another day. I'm sure it would be fascinating and it'd be a lot of fun. And then just in terms of thinking more deeply, I don't want to say what I was looking for, but what you need to think about is the states, but we also have a national government, right? The first words of the preamble, we the people. There's a collective, we're 50 parts. That tension is brutal. You reference federalism. But then if you have Georgia playing around with some of these votes, and other states, in the name of political repression, the 14th Amendment is there for us. Equal protection, right? We are citizens of our states, but we are citizens of our country as well. The Constitutional Supremacy Clause, 14th Amendment, will sort of work through that. And you're right. You got to sue. You got to go to court. You got your First Amendment. Excellent stuff in there. I'm really impressed, and I wish you very much luck tomorrow as you get another shot at it. I'm sure you'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.